Awesome. Welcome, everyone. I see more and more people are joining. So I would say feel free to share where you're calling in from, where you're watching from which places in the world are you listening in. Happy to have another Ondana event. I'm really excited. It will be a very interesting conversation today. And we will start in just a few moments. I will let in more and more people. I see more and more people are joining from Pakistan, tuning in from the Philippines, from Austria. I'm calling in from Germany, so quite close to Austria, Nepal, nice, India. Great. Okay, so welcome everyone. Let's start. And, it's a very, very interesting event, and we will talk about some very relevant problems and topics that are going on right now. And I want to dive into it immediately. So I will just give you a very, very brief introduction into what we are doing at Ondana and why we are doing this event and how it connects. So I will share my screen with you real quick. So my name is Michael. I'm heading marketing and business development at Ondana. And I would say that Ondana is a platform which is about helping organizations and also AI engineers to make an impact and build interesting solutions with AI. And everything that we are doing is about collaboration. So we believe that in order to solve the most meaningful and relevant problems in the world, you need to have people from different backgrounds coming together and really working together, not competing against each other, but working together to overcome challenges and build solutions. And we have more than 4,000 engineers from more than 100 countries. And we have worked with many interesting organizations from around the world to build solutions. And we are running many projects also at the moment. And we think that in order to build a really fulfilling and productive career, there are three key elements. And one element is learning, so continuous learning. Another element is impact, making an impact. So actually seeing the work that you're doing being implemented in the real world and changing something for good. And the third aspect is community. In the end, we all want to work together. And right now we are sharing information with each other, and there is a collaboration already happening. And that's what Ondana is really about. And we thought, okay, why is it that so many people are not happy and people are leaving their jobs? And what do organizations need to do to create this productive and happy workplace? And that's what the event is today about. So we will very quickly jump into it, and we will have three amazing panelists. So we have John Younger, who will introduce himself. He is an HR thought leader, among many things. We have Raul Varma, who is the global head of HR at Accenture Technology. And we have Rosanna, who's a long-term Ondana collaborator and recently got a role as a senior data scientist. So she brings in a very, very interesting perspective and journey. And that's it from my side. So I will hand it over now to John, who will start and give an introduction into the event, and then we go step by step. So John, handing it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. And I'm delighted to join my two fellow panelists. I don't know what the correct word is. It's not fellow panelists, but co-panelists, perhaps. Thank you, Rosanna, for that. That was a kind smile of an idiot. I'm the idiot here. But thank you so much. I'm going to try, Michael, you've asked me to sort of give a context for this, and I know that Rosanna's going to talk about what it looks like from data science. I know Rahul is going to talk about it from the perspective of technology globally, but also Accenture. I wanted to give a little bit of a broader overview of what's happening around this phrase, the great resignation. And I'm delighted that you invited me to speak today. Let me give just a little bit of data. In September, 4.4 million U.S. folks resigned from their jobs. In October, the 4.2 million resigned. The number of job openings in the country rose to 11 million from October, from 10.6 million in September. But this is not the Great Resignation. I would like to change those words. It is actually the Great Awakening, if I may call it just that. Two categories of people are leaving their jobs: people who feel exploited and people who feel empowered. And they are quite different categories of people that I'd like to go into. Let's start with the people who are feeling exploited. Hospitality is an example. I know that it's not tech, but I want you to hear that this is global, worldwide, and spans way more than specific technologies. In our global survey of freelancing, these people describe themselves as optimistic, confident, hardworking, and frustrated by their circumstances. And with situations like the Better.com Zoom firing and nastiness of the CEO, is it any surprise that 1 in 3 workers are now considering leaving their jobs, and almost 60% are rethinking their careers? For many of these individuals, the hours were awful, the boss was nasty, and the pay was terrible. Let's turn from gigsters for a moment to independent professionals or freelancers. They're empowered by the freelance revolution. Let's keep in mind a very important data point, and that is and I'm just going to talk about the US for a moment, but it's generalizable worldwide. Of the 60 million freelancers in the US, and thinking broadly about the rest of the world, 3/4 of these folks are part-time or side giggers. That is to say, full-time employees who have a second source of income, freelancing in the evenings, freelancing on the weekends, freelancing as a second job. And an example, I hired a forensic accountant to help with the valuation of a startup that I was invested in. He was full-time in government in Bucharest, part-time freelancing to make some extra money. But they aren't just making extra money. They are learning that they have options. And more, they are thinking like freelancers because they are, as I would like to describe it, freelance light. What do freelancers care about? You mentioned learning, impact, and community. Our data says that the 3 things that are most important for freelancers, building on your comments, Michael, are autonomy, number 1, agency, and affiliation. Autonomy is flexibility, independence, the ability to choose where and when and how I'm going to do the work. Impact, agency is impact. It's the ability to have an impact, but not only an impact on the work, creating something of value, of importance, but it's also impact on my career. And third, affiliation, and you mentioned the notion of community is very, very important. Full-time employment is not giving people the independence, flexibility, impact, and network that they want and that they need in order to stay relevant over the course of their career. They don't trust their leaders. Pew, for example, the research house, found that only 1/4 of folks trust institution and political leaders, and fewer still trust business leaders. And situations like Better.com mortgage company firing 900 by Zoom kills trust in business more generally. It's expanded. People hear that and they wonder what's happening in their organization. So more and more people who started out seeking additional income are finding out that they've gotten something beyond additional income. What they found is that side gigs, part-time freelancing, is a kind of career insurance. And they are making more demands, Michael and folks, because they feel they have an alternative, or they're able to walk away, and they have the confidence that they can stand on their own and be successful. In our data, 60% of freelancers have enough or more work. Side giggers see that. They hear that freelancers are more satisfied. They hear that 60% plus are committed to a freelance career, and they say, what about me? And we can bet that the flexible blended workforce will grow to be the norm in the next 10 years of industry because it makes sense. Why? Because companies need access to experts they can't afford, couldn't attract or use full time. Startups that need different help at each chapter of their growth. There were 150,000 new startups this year. It's been the biggest year for seed investment and capital growth ever. And what we know as a conclusion is that people see that, they want to be part of it, they distrust the employment situation that they're in or that they worry about, and they want to go for themselves. They want to be increasingly solopreneurs, and this is the time that they're trying to take. So, it's not the Great Resignation, it's the Great Awakening. Some people are saying, I don't want to be exploited anymore. Some people are saying, I'm going to do something with my empowerment. But both are becoming what we call solopreneurs with the eventual potential of becoming entrepreneurs as well. Michael, that's my intro. I'm very excited about the way the world is moving, and I'm excited to hear what my co-panelists have to say.
Thanks, John. Thanks. That's very interesting. I think it's a very good foundation that we can connect to. I think, Raul, if you can go next and yeah, talk a bit about what you're doing at Accenture and how this plays a role for you at the moment.
Hi, Michael, and lovely to meet you, John and Rosanna. Thank you for inviting me here today to be part of this discussion. I just want to start with an apology at the outset. I mentioned this to Michael yesterday. I had a sudden personal situation due to which I'll actually have to leave earlier, right at the bottom of the hour. So apologies for that. But I was very excited to join, and as I've heard from Michael about the Ondana mission and the model and how this is coming together, it's a really inspiring model of how you start with a community and connect to community and focus on doing good in the world as you tackle some really hard and complex challenges. My vantage point is a bit different from John's, so I'll give you a quick introduction to myself and what I do and what I'm seeing around the world. So as a personal introduction, I lead HR for Accenture Technology globally. Accenture is a big employer in the world. We have over 625,000 people all around the world. Of which over 350,000 are in technology. Technologies that literally are the core of what we do in Accenture, and it's a big professional services organizations, and we work with leading corporations around the world to help transform themselves and be able to capture the power of digital while being able to harness human potential and further the impact that they have in the world. I've been with Accenture for a long time, for 27 years, and I have lived around the world. This is my fifth city and third country, having been in India for several years, Singapore for several years. Now I'm based in New York. And about half of my career, the last half of my career, has been in different global roles. So I tend to view the world from that perspective. If I look at what we are seeing, I really liked how John phrased this as the Great Awakening. If I look at the last 20 months that we've been through, as a world, as Accenture, as people, I think it's been the most dramatic, the most profound 20 months in a century. And so therefore, what we're seeing in the workforce is much of a reflection of what has happened in people's lives and what they've actually encountered. In Accenture 20 months ago, in March, we found ourselves shipping out tens of thousands of people all around the world, working in offices, working in client sites, and to get them safely to work from home. I'm coming to you from my place right now here in an apartment in Manhattan. But 20 months ago, I did not have a desk. I had to keep my laptop on a sideboard and work because it's not a reality I had envisioned ever. And then over the course of the pandemic, people were impacted so profoundly with months and months of lockdowns, with infections coming in, loss that they started to see around them. And in parts of the world, this impact was really profound. If you think of places like India that experienced the second wave in April and May, and Southeast Asia subsequently after that, Latin America over the last a few months, and this, I mean, the story just goes on and on. And this has had a profound impact on people. And we just cannot wish away that impact when we show up every morning on the screen, looking to do whatever we are looking to do, and get through 10 to 12 hours of work a day. You just can't, there's a processing that's natural and needed that needs to occur through all of this. So I say that as context, because when we talk about the Great Resignation, now coming to what we're seeing, this is profoundly different from previous cycles of hyper attrition whenever they've happened. When you can go back to the dot-com bust of 2001, in the run-up to that, we were seeing people leaving big corporations and gravitating towards startups at a dramatic rate at that time. But that was just a whole new world of opportunity that was opening up. And subsequently, coming out of the Great Recession, we again saw some cycles of hyper attrition. But what we are seeing now is that there's a difference in why people are leaving, and companies need to understand that, because how many companies are responding to this is similar to how they've responded in the past to past cycles of hyper attrition. So what you tend to do is, well, there's a lot of demand for technology today. There's more demand than we have people. And so if people are leaving, well, what can we do from a compensation standpoint? What can we do from a career progression standpoint? What can we do to help people be as productive as that can be? Well, that's only part of the equation. But the bigger part of the equation of why people are leaving is because people need to be able to connect to their purpose, and there's that awakening to that purpose, which is more profound. And just being able to work 10, 12 hours a day and earn a great wage is not all why people exist. People are also leaving because they feel less valued by organizations, or less valued or connected to their teams and their supervisors. Again, that's quite understandable, because when you're living in such a virtual world, it's very hard to forge connections. So I think there's a broader context to what is going on over here, as John alluded to. And I think the great awakening that people have, I think, is also, there's a call for a greater awakening on part of employers and on part of corporations to say, how do we actually help create a sense of belonging to the community, to the company, to the team, to the purpose that we have? And I think those are the kinds of things that we need to start seeing happen. And there are ways to do this. But I think that's what this time is calling upon us. Let me just pause over there. That was some of my thinking. Back to you, Michael, on how you'd like to take this forward.
Thanks, Rahul. Thanks a lot. I think you mentioned purpose and community and belonging. So I want to hand it over to Rosanna, because she has a very interesting journey. So Rosanna, tell us a bit about your journey.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, John and Rahul, for this very nice beginning of the conversation. I think it's from what John was saying, like with all the statistics and with everything we see, and even rephrasing it to call it the Great Awakening. And also what Rahul was saying about purpose and so on, it comes quite just nicely to share a bit of my experience. And in my case, I am also just an introduction, I am a senior data scientist at Hack Time Series. And this is a company that specializes in time series, and it's for the energy sector. And it's quite interesting that the role I have now is on the research and development department, because I had quite a long career in research in academia. And then I made this transition to this new career, so to say. And it is kind of I worked in academia for more than 10 years as a researcher. And then through the the community from Ondana and so on, I actually made this transition to data science, like more officially, so to say. So talking a little bit about the mindset of the community themselves, like of those, like I am one of those persons that actually are in this situation of transitioning and so on. So like being part of the Ondana community, this has been almost 2 years now and more than 15 projects. So it's, I had the chance to really connect to a lot of people and a lot of people that are exactly in this situation of like, I am starting a new career. So for example, like very young people that are like the new generation, so to say. I'm 35, so I'm not really the new generation, but like I had the chance to work with people in the 20s, people that are finishing their studies and so on, but also like people that already had a career and they're like, hey, there's this new thing about data science. So what is this about? How can I contribute and so on? And what Raul was saying about purpose, this is something that was one of the reasons that I, for example, joined Ondana. And it's something that I feel very strongly in the community and even in my career path as well. Like I changed career with the goal of doing something more impactful for society. So I was before working with astronomy in academia. I mean, this is so very insightful and nice, but I wanted to do something like more associated to climate change and so on. So like this is basically how I joined this data science journey, so to say. And the place where I was before, I would come to people and say, hey, I want to do something different. And people would look at me like, are you crazy? Like, you have a PhD, are you not becoming a professor or something? And then I was feeling like very like a person like that is not understood. And when I joined this community, and I mean, there are many others out there, of course, you can see that this is something that is very common. So there is, I just needed to find my people. So there are a lot of people out there that really feel like this, that really feel like there is, it's not just about a career, it's not about our status, it's not about even like how much money you're making, is like what is out there, what are the problems that we have in the world and how can we start tackling them? Because we are not just like, this is a very 21st century thing, like that we are, there's not just like a self in us and so on. There is this entire like space and like our community and our planet and so on. And like, what can you do about it? So this is something that I think is also very much related to this topic of like people trying to rethink like their careers because it's part of their identity. So how can we have an identity that is still more oriented to our values and the new values of society, because they are not the same as the ones that they were like above decades ago. So, yeah.
Thanks, Rosanna. Thanks a lot. Already some comments. You're so inspiring. So yeah, I think that the journey, right, is always interesting, and we are all on a journey. So I think what I would be curious at this point is that I read this sentence that Raul put in one of his articles on LinkedIn, which is, it's about how can you do your best by being your best. And I think that connects to the great awakening or the great resignation, because in the end, it's about, as an individual, how can you be your best and do your best, and how can organizations empower you, enable you to be your best. So I would be curious, Raul, how does that phrase translate maybe to your personal life and also professional life, but then also in the context of Accenture? How are you, taking measurements to empower people? What is something that you maybe have done in the recent year or 2 years?
Thank you. Thank you for looking that up, Michael, and thank you for your question. So, I'll tell you how I come at this, and some glimpse of how we bring that to life in our work. So if you think about traditionally how organizations have viewed people, certainly in the knowledge economy, when we say person, human being, people, what we knowingly or unknowingly are actually saying is we equate a human being to their brain. And so we think of, how do we get the maximum output of a person? How do we get the most productivity? How do we motivate them so they don't leave us and go off elsewhere, etc. Right? So that's how we kind of think about people. And similarly, as human beings, we often start thinking about ourselves as brains as well. And the reality is we are more than our brains. This brain resides in a body. That body has its own innate intelligence. The body has its own needs that we need to be tuned into. And the purpose of this body is not to take our brain from call to call or screen to screen or one coding assignment to another. But it is to be nurtured. It is to be, we need to take care of this body, because when we don't do that over an extended period of time, bad things happen. And when bad things happen to the body, bad things happen to the brain. We just can't, we can't be as productive. Now, within this body is also a heart. That heart seeks recognition, the heart seeks connection, the heart seeks to be valued. And so in organizations, we kind of say, okay, well, let's make sure we have some kind of community. Let's make sure we do some recognition so people feel good about it. But there is more to it that we seek as human beings. And then finally, each one of us is more than a brain, is more than a body, is more than our heart. We also have a soul that seeks purpose. And so this sounds a bit esoteric, and you're saying, well, how does that actually come to life in an organization? Well, the first thing is when we acknowledge that the person that shows up every single day is these four elements, and therefore when we recognize that, we need to nurture that. So how do we do that? Well, in Accenture, we started saying a phrase called truly human, that we want to be the most truly human company in the digital era. We started saying that a few years ago. And we started to institute a number of ways to bring that to life. So one of the things that we've done is a huge focus on personal wellness and well-being. We have a big partnership with organizations like Thrive Global and others. And we have brought that mainstream into being able to institute programs, being able to have these kind of conversations within our mainstream meetings and so on. Now, when the pandemic struck, this whole notion of taking care of people took on an entirely different dimension. We grew up thinking about, well, we need to take care of people in the sense of motivating them. But John talked about how the trust in institutions has fallen apart. And I think that became very, very real, because as the second wave happened in many countries, or even the first wave when it happened, it was simply not possible for governments, for healthcare institutions, etc., to be able to keep people alive or get them help that they needed. And that's where business leaders needed to step in and do more and more. And there are all kinds of inspiring stories about how that had to happen in the face of great adversity and great necessity. And so that has become more important and more real in how we take care of people, how we bring them back to offices safely, or take the call to not come to offices when we need to. So there's a whole kind of dimension around that. But essentially, the knowledge that we are more than our brain, that we are this whole human being, needs to translate into ways of working. So not keeping people on extended times on screens, being able to architect your meetings so that you have 25-minute meetings rather than 30 minutes, or 50 minutes rather than 60 minutes. Bringing in consciousness that taking breaks and movement are important. Providing access to different kinds of areas, for instance, bringing awareness to the apps that we have on our phone, and the ability to be able to track and have conversations on health data. All of that needs to get more and more mainstream. And that's what I really mean when I say to be able to do your best, you need to be your best, and that awareness and making that a mainstream conversation starts to bring in these kind of practices more and more. So Michael, thanks again for the question, and my profound apologies, but I do need to step out at this point in time. And I look forward to connecting on more such events. So thanks again, and all the best. Have a great discussion.
Thank you, Rahul. Thanks a lot. So I would say that's a good foundation for John. So I think what Rahul just mentioned is he was giving some examples on what organizations need to do in order to attract and retain talent. And I think what you said, John, is organizations who do not have these points in place are not able to attract talent anymore. So how does that connect what Rahul said to your findings?
Sorry, I started talking and didn't take the mute off. You know, Michael, let me answer it in a sort of a roundabout way that I hope you'll find interesting. For those of you on the call that are freelancers, one of the things that, or whether full-time or part-time, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time trying to understand is what is it that companies need to do to attract and retain top freelancers, right? Because there's not only a war for talent among employees, there's a war for freelance talent just as much. We hear all the time about how, for example, Worksome, one platform that's moved from Denmark to the UK and now in the US, has grown 400%. We know that lots of other organizations are as full as they can be at a platform level, and we know how busy Ondana is. So what is it that companies really need to do in order to be attractive companies to freelancers? First, they need to have a philosophy of how they're going to use freelancers and what role they're going to play. Are they just on demand for very small bits, or is there a continuing relationship? And how well articulated is that? How well socialized is that in the organization? Second, they need to do a good job of helping freelancers to have a very clear idea of the deliverables required, the timeline required, what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, etc. And it's very important that these folks have regular feedback. You know, their ability to make a living depends on how well they're satisfying their customer. And the only way to satisfy your customer is to know what your customer's thinking. And so two-way feedback becomes really important. Third, working with freelancers is different than working with employees. And so it's very important that managers understand how to work with freelancers. It's not the same as working with employees in the sense that you can command, order, require, etc. Freelancers, much more than full-time employees, are solopreneurs. They're small business owners that are partnering with the organization, not working as a cog in the organization. That's a harsh statement, but it's a real one. Fourth is that it's very important that freelancers feel as though they're part of the team while they're doing their work, that they're treated like part of the organization for purposes of communication, for purposes of feedback, for purposes of just getting along with others so that they're not dealing with the loneliness. Fifth, there's some work that can be done by freelancers, and there's some work that shouldn't be done by freelancers if they don't have the relationships, if they don't have access to the IP, et cetera, et cetera. So making sure that the freelancer has a reasonable expectation of the job that they need to do is very important. And the last piece is you have to treat them with fairness and respect. You have to pay them on time. You have to treat them well, et cetera. Now, Michael, when you hear that, doesn't that also sound like the recipe for employees in general? Those 6 things: a philosophy of management and leadership, good performance management, a manager that knows how to work with you, feeling as though you're part of the team, getting the work that's appropriate for you, and being treated with fairness and respect. And what we know is that less than 50% of employees are experiencing that. So I love what Rahul said. I think it's very important. The challenge in what Rahul said is that it's not necessarily a global, generally owned and bought into culture. That in big companies like Accenture and many others, managers are given a tremendous amount of freedom to manage as they wish. Some of them are worried about the head, heart, soul, as Rahul said. Some of them don't give a crap. Some of them just want you to be wherever you need to be for their purpose on Monday morning and Friday night. And that's what's giving people a hard time. They want to be part of an organization that cares about and treats them with respect, treats them with kindness, and values the head, heart, soul. What we're experiencing these days is an awful lot of people that say, that's not my experience. and I'm getting out of Dodge. That would be my comment. I love what Rahul said, and I hope that it's true for 650,000 and not a far smaller number of people.
Well, thanks, John, for your honesty, and I think that's very important. So I'd be very, in the end, that's the only way to have a productive conversation and solve problems, to be honest, and really, talk about what's happening. And I think it would be very interesting to get Rosanna's experience on this. What you're thinking about this, and also maybe, Rosanna, how, we have the employer perspective, which we can talk about, which is very important, but also the employee perspective. And maybe there are a few things reflecting on the last 2 years that you can share, which might be related to your mindset, learnings that you have on how you can take action as an individual to, make a change and get into a direction that you are feeling more comfortable, where you, grow more, where you are happier, where you have more challenges, right? Maybe it's also about being too bored at times. So I'd be curious about, your perspective.
Thank you, Michael. And I think what Rahul and John said were very important, like this part of how the companies can bring this and also, but how not this happening much. When we talk about, for example, that there is a new culture in the world and so on, we have to, of course, it is a movement that is global, but we have to remember that each part of the world has its own culture. So, for example, in some parts of the United States, it's completely normal that you work many hours per week. And whereas maybe here in Europe, it's something that is not seen as something okay. For example, it's not okay to work on Sundays and so on. So it's nice to have this understanding. And I think that from my perspective, one thing that was extremely empowering was to actually, after I decided to change careers, I had to, of course, create some sort of plan for implement that. And one of the things that was the most valuable thing I believe I did was to actually sit and try to understand myself. It's a little bit in the direction of what Rahul was saying, you can only nurture mind and soul and so on if you actually understand what is it that you need, and each person might need different things. So for me, for example, I needed to understand what were my values. What is a deal breaker? What is not? What are my goals? For example, do you want is your goal to make a lot of money, or is your goal to, and for example, if you want to make a lot of money, are you willing to work 10,000 hours per week to make that? Or is your goal to have maybe a more inspiring career or more inspiring work that maybe will not pay you as well? So having this understanding, it's something that is very important for you. It's you have to know yourself to know where you want to come, and especially to know what kind of culture you're going to be seeking to find in the other places that you're going to be working, or even in a freelance and so on. So which is also something that I did for some time, and I still do it a little bit. So I think that understanding yourself is something that is very important, and understanding the culture of the place, the places that you're looking at. So, for example, when I think that sometimes, especially talking to young students and so on, still in the academia part, which is also work, sometimes I see people oh, I want to go to this university because it's this very fancy university, this very famous university. And I always the mentees I have at Ondana, I always tell them have you spoken with the professors there before? Have you talked to someone that worked with them before? It's something that is extremely important that you understand the kind of environment that you are getting in. Because, for example, if you want to have a very chill life and so on, maybe you don't want to be a consultant in a big company, because there are very high chances that you won't have a chill life, because it's really not possible. So it's something that you have to understand. And there's no necessarily right or wrong on which directions you want to go, but this is something that is important. And I would also say that to really get into a place that there is a value, what is the best for you and for the companies, it's very important that you understand also that there are places that they will value, at least even sectors that they have more oriented mentalities to value profit. whereas other organizations will value impact or will value like different kinds of results, different kinds of metrics. So like it's important to understand what is the metric of a success, so to say, of what you are looking for, because otherwise you might end up in a place that you didn't want to be in the first place. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Rosanna. We can start the Q&A. I think we have another 5 to 10 minutes for the Q&A. So we already have 2 questions, one for Rosanna. What step did you take that made you feel you had a breakthrough in data science? Was there something like this, a breakthrough moment?
Thank you for the question. Was this Martin? I think. Yeah. So yeah, this is something very important that you're asking, because I always say this, like for a very long time, maybe even Michael remembered it. So the beginning of last year, like I started to give talks and so on, like about data science. And I would always come and introduce myself as I am a researcher transitioning to data science. So I think, and even though after like I was already participating in many projects, I've already had a lot of experience and so on. So like I think the breakthrough is actually something that is in your mind. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that you just think about data science and you will become a data scientist. Of course not. But like, it's like you have to have your plan or like a road that you want to follow. Like, there are many areas that you can specialize in data science. Data science is a huge field. But after getting experience and so on, is something that you still need to like, if you cannot convince yourself that you are a data scientist, like how are you going to convince someone else? Like how you're going to give the confidence to other people that you can do a good job and so on. So that's something that is like, I would say that the breakthrough happens through your mind, like to really convincing yourself that you can do the job.
Okay, there's another question from Lucy. I would like to know, how is the best way to establish expectations with your project manager or team leader? Maybe Rosanna, maybe John, maybe you also have something to add here.
John, I don't know if you want to go first. Okay.
All right, you go first. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that is also one of those things that we were talking about before, like that, you know, like of course, like it depends a lot on the size of your team, but I would say that like for succeeding in having a career that you want to have, whatever it is, it's extremely important to have this communication. Like I keep saying this over and over again, like a communication is key for pretty much anything they want to achieve, like that involves other people. So you need to really like maybe your goal is that you want to, I don't know, get more into some directions. Let's say like you're in data science, your goal is to become more into data management, or your goal is to become more into like go into some other direction. But you know, like I'm afraid that there is no way around it. I know it's complicated in terms of culture, but you have to find a place where this can happen, like where you can have someone that you can simply have this kind of freedom, you know, like that doesn't need to be, you know, like I would say that nowadays people actually appreciate it, because you know, like the managers also don't have crystal balls. Sometimes it's difficult for them, like to also like they might sometimes have even like very good intentions of what they are like directing you into, because they might think that this is what you want. But if this is not, like it's really on you to like build the courage and like just like be transparent about what your plans are. And maybe you don't have plans, but it's important to have this conversation of what are my options. So like expectations both on the side of the employer and the employee. So if those expectations cannot be met, then you might have a problem. Otherwise, you can have this conversation and find out that maybe the option that you wanted is not possible, but maybe there is something else. So you just have to go and ask.
I'll add a little bit to the excellent comments that Rosanna has made. So the first thing to keep in mind is that there's an 80-20 split here, but a very different 80-20 split than we typically talk about. 80% of your managers or project manager or your team leader's concerns are about his or her ability to achieve their objectives. Only 20% of their interest is you. So the first thing that you've got to establish is that the team leader or project manager can count on you to do your job, to achieve your results. If he or she or they can't count on you, that's a problem that you've got to fix first and foremost. Second, you've got to know the boss. You've got to know whether the boss will respond positively or negatively, what drives the boss. So do your homework first. Before you have that conversation of any kind, talk to people that you trust, that knows your boss, and say, what will he or she or they respond to appropriately? What will they find problematic? In other words, do your homework. Third, really important for you to know about yourself and be clear about what you want. So many people go to their boss and say, I'm not sure what I want, but I want something different than what I have now, which means I can't, as a boss, help you with that. First, you've got to tell me where your goals are, and then we figure out how to fix that. If you don't know what your goals are, I recommend, there's a friend of mine in Israel, a wonderful tech guy named Tal Shmuley, and he talks about a personal hackathon. Consider a personal hackathon. Sit down with 3 or 4 friends, talk this stuff out, and ask your friends whether what you're talking about makes sense, whether it's logical, whether you're likely to get a good response or a bad response. In other words, not only do your homework around what your boss reactions is going to be, but also do your homework around what you really want as opposed to what you don't want. So many people have a clearer view of what they don't want than what they want. Finally, it's super important that you have regular conversation with your boss, and it's got to be two-way feedback. But you've got to find out whether your boss is open to that first. If not open to that, you've got to establish credibility and respect first, and then you can start to have two-way feedback. So the big message of all of this is it's on you to do the homework to make this successful. At the end of the day, if you are an employee, your relationship with your boss is colonialist. You are owned. It's an important thing to understand that all the power is on the management side. That's a problem. The only way to deal with that is for you to increase your credibility to establish your power as part of that conversation. And if you don't do it, you're always going to be waiting for direction from the boss. You're always going to be responding to your boss's pros and cons, likes and dislikes. Not a good situation.
Thanks, John. I think that, is based on a lot of, experience and having done it actually, right? So it sounds on point. So yeah, and in the comments we see that it appeals. So thanks for that. I think we have time for 2 more questions. So, and I would like to keep it on point. So I would say one question that has been upvoted is, it's for Rosanna, but I think it's also for John, how to understand your own values. So maybe just 1 key thing, 2 key things that you think, how do you get there? How do you understand your own values?
So thanks for the question. Nice to see you here as well. I think at least one thing that worked for me was actually an exercise that I took from a course that is like, try to think back of your life, like even when you were a child, and try to make a map of how happy you were. And like when you were like, I mean, maybe you don't remember when you were 5, but maybe you remember when you were 10. So what were the things that were happening in your life that made you happy? Like, for example, maybe you were very happy when you were taking some sports class, and then you know that this is something that you actually like. And then this is kind of like the initial step. And then you can go further and like, why did you like that? And like start to ask questions to yourself, like, what are the things that you remember doing? What are the things that you did in your life, like in general? And then how is this something that made you happy, and why? So for me, it's something that I was very, very happy like to always help people doing volunteering and so on. So this is something that I know that I value community, that I value impact and so on. So like maybe for you something else, but just trying to like really have this, so to say, intimate conversation with yourself and start to ask questions. If you need to write down, then write down, and maybe in some other moment you will realize what the kind of like the keyword behind your happiness is. John?
Gosh, let me answer it in a different way than perhaps, and I hope it's helpful. I think the challenge is to be less retrospective and less historical than it is to be more future focused. I mean, let's remember that we're operating in a world that's very different than the world that many of us were born into. So let's accept that world as it's given. Let's accept what's going on in the world. And let's ask the question, consider asking the question, what is it that will make me satisfied, content, maybe not happy, but maybe content, maybe serene, maybe accepted, given the situation that we're going to find ourselves in. So one of the things that we know, for example, is that this is a very tough time in terms of health kinds of issues. So one of the things that we may not even pay attention to is the importance of our own health, because it's like talking to a fish about water. I mean, it's just contextual and it's really hard. I would say to you that one of the things that may also be very, very helpful is understanding that you're not the best judge of your values, that others are a better judge of your values, because values are the things that reflect what you do. A value is an action, if you will, not a thought. And so one of the things, going back to the hackathon, would be asking folks that you trust, that you respect, that you think are smart, what do you see as my values based on my behavior? Maybe that'll give you a foundation to start to explore. I mean, in a certain sense, that's what therapy is all about, right? So maybe use other people as a way to check in with yourself and find out whether what you think are your values are in fact your values in action. Hope that helps. To you, Michael.
Yeah, well, I think that this is, it's a very good point that often we are biased towards ourselves, right? So we don't see ourselves clearly. So we will get more information, different information, when we ask somebody else to share something about ourselves. So I think that's a very, very good one. I think we have one more question, and this comes from Stefan, and he's saying, pardon the provocative question, why do you think it took a pandemic for these insights? Do you have any thought on this?
I'll go first. I don't think it took a pandemic to have these insights. I think that these insights have been around, but that there's Stefan, I believe that the pandemic has put quite a sharp point on it and forced people to consider things that they may not have considered up to this point. And so, one way to think about the pandemic is it's been very helpful as long as you weren't sick or died. And that's kind of a troublesome way of thinking about it. But at the end of the day, for many of us, it's forced us, by dint of being inside, by dint of changing jobs, by dint of moving, et cetera, it's forced us to really think about what matters to us, what are not what our values are necessarily, but what we believe to be important in our life now. And so I guess one of the things that I would say is that the pandemic has forced many of us, certainly forced me, to be much more present in my thinking about myself. And so if you were to ask me, Stefan, how would I describe myself these days? What I say is that I'm a full-time grandfather, a full-time husband, and a part-time everything else. And that for me is a way of saying to the world, F you, this is who I am and this is where I'm going. And I encourage you to do the same.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that it's all about we were cut to the essentials. And I think that the pandemic, I agree that it's not necessarily what brought us to it, but it was actually what was just the wake up call. People were already unhappy, but maybe before, because we had all the socializations and so on, we could have this moment, or we could just forget about it. We could just we are unhappy, but we just go out and I don't know, go to a party or something. And then exactly as John said, we had this more we have to be present. We have to deal with our own emotions. So it's something that, and then the second thing is also it showed that it's possible. So for example, for a very long time, people were talking about remote work, and they were forced to have remote work. And now this is there is proof now, there is data that this is happening. So you cannot say that maybe we'll do, or maybe, but if you do this, might be that X, Y, Z. It's not the case anymore. We know, at least we have almost 2 years now of statistics on data to know what works and what doesn't. So we don't need to just think about it how it is, and this is a reality now, and then we can make our decisions about that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rosanna. Thanks, John. It's time to wrap up, and I would just maybe put it in one sentence. It seems to me that it's about getting to know yourself better, and then maybe finding an organization which is empowering you to explore yourself and gives you, empowerment. And those two go hand in hand. So I think that became clear. And I'm very grateful that John, that you joined again and was sharing your wisdom, and Rosanna also many events. And I hope that everyone listening in enjoyed it, and you got something of value, and you can do something, right? Can take action. And thank you very much. Thanks, John. Thanks, Rosanna.
Pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Michael, for setting this up. Take care, all. Nice to meet you, Rosanna.
Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.